All right, welcome. How are you doing tonight, Katya?
Andy, how are
That's
you
good.
doing?
Fantastic. I just got the email notification that the YouTube channel that I subscribe to, it just went live.
Ooh, I wonder who that could be.
If anybody watching that's not subscribed, don't want to miss any of our shows.
Mhm.
And so for anybody that did not see the Facebook post that I put up about 20 minutes ago, we were able to get a very special guest for tonight. So we will have Richard Dreiser, uh, Yerkes Historian extraordinaire, on with us. He will be joining us in about half an hour. Katya and I are going to teach about the Zodiac, and I'm going to do this introduction all over again in like 3 minutes.
Good evening, Alex.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining us. Got one setting I forgot to put.
Oh,
There we go. For anybody interested in using Stellarium, if you only want one constellation to come up at a time, this is very handy. And because I know where we're going to be pointing, I do only want one constellation up at a time. Right, if you're sitting in the room, if you guys could all do me a favor, use that share button and send the link to Facebook or anywhere else so people can join in. Let's see how many people we can get going on this stream tonight, especially with an awesome guest like Richard Dreiser waiting. Oh, hello, Bob. This is a couple shows in a row we've had for you. Is the Dragon launch day or is that tomorrow? The 30th, I thought, right?
yeah, I think it was postponed because it was supposed to be yesterday, but they had to cancel it,
Scrub the
yesterday because of
launch.
bad weather. Yeah, there was like a tornado watch or something in the area.
That would do it.
That's what I heard.
Right, we just got a little bit more. We're gonna wait a couple more minutes.
Mm,
Katya, do you have a favorite zodiac constellation?
favorite? Ooh, that is difficult to say. Hmm. I don't know. Do you?
I do, and I'll make sure I mention it when we get to it.
Ooh. Okay.
It's kind of tough picking a favorite because there's a bunch of really cool constellations in the zodiac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think the two that I've seen the most um is Sagittarius and Scorpio. But then again, Taurus is where the Crab Nebula is. And I can't pass up a good Crab Nebula.
Yeah, I
Um,
and I'm also guilty of
Crab
saying
Nebula.
that many nice. I'm guilty of saying that many different of the zodiacs are my favorite. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna have to pick a definitive one before we get to it. See which one I settle on. All right, with that, we are gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to another episode of The Classroom with Katya and I. First of all, if you have not joined us before, let me introduce myself. I am Adam McCulloch, the planetarium specialist here at Class Education, and with COVID-19 going on and us not being able to do any of our fun in-person star parties, this is what we came up with, so we hope you guys are enjoying these shows as much as we are. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Katya Gosman, our astronomy expert, astronomy extraordinaire. She goes by many titles. So if you have a tough astronomy question at any point, feel free to throw it in the chat, and if we see it, Katya will do her best to answer it. But with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. Today, the title was From Sagittarius to the Sun, Yerkes Zodiac. So Yerkes has a special connection to the Zodiac in that if you've ever taken the tour at Yerkes, you're familiar with the architecture, specifically on the pillars, and a lot of the references to the Zodiac that are on the pillars. So we are going to get to the pillars specifically later on in the show when Richard Dreiser joins us. For now, we're going to explain what the Zodiac is, kind of take a look from around the entire night sky, get a handle on where to find those zodiac constellations, and just why are they important? Why do we actually care about these constellations? So with that, we're going to get started with Stellarium. If you're not familiar, Stellarium is a really cool free tool that you can download and have a planetarium on your own computer. And it is free. So win-win there. So first things first, we're going to kind of look around the sky. Now, as we get closer and closer to June, I'm getting more and more frustrated because the sun is hanging out longer and longer. And I know I'm probably one of the few people to complain about the sun being out more, but it kind of stinks for us when we want to do astronomy. It also doesn't help and that's part of why we are observing sessions start so late at night, because our telescope that we use for those sessions is all the way in California. Unfortunately, by the way, if you were planning to join us for that section later tonight, we had to cancel because it is currently raining in Sonoma, and just the weather forecast did not look promising, so we will not be observing tonight. But back to more fun stuff. So we're gonna move forward in time a little bit. So a really handy thing you can do in Stellarium is just move time forward. And we're going to go until all of the light is out of the sky. And we're left with a nice dark night sky. And so now we are all the way at about 10:18 later tonight. We're just going to pause time so it doesn't move on us, although I doubt we'll be here that long. Now, Stellarium is super helpful because, as you can see, it gives you these wonderful red cardinal directions to help you find your way around the night sky. However, if you were to go outside at night, you're not going to have those big red letters staring you in the face telling you what direction you're facing, so you kind of have to navigate yourself. One other thing that Stellarium does that's very nice is it labels the really bright stars, and these are the first stars that you're going to be able to pick out when you go outside. Obviously, we have Vega, Arcturus, which is almost straight overhead when you go outside at night, and as you can see over here, we have the moon. Very nice and handy to have the moon up. So what we're going to do first is look for a very specific pattern of stars that hopefully all of us recognize, or after tonight, you will recognize going forward. And right now, in the middle of our screen, as we zoom in a little bit closer, we have a very famous pattern of stars here. The Big Dipper. Now, the Big Dipper is really good to find first, not only because it is always up in the night sky, and we'll actually explain why that is in a little bit, but also because it's one of the brighter constellations out there. When you go outside and you look for kind of the brightest stars in the sky, normally you'll pick out a couple that are much brighter than most of the others, but if you look around the sky, you'll eventually see this nice tight pattern of fairly bright stars. And 6 of the 7 stars in here are decently bright, so it makes it easy to find them no matter where you are, regardless of how much light pollution there is. When I lived in Milwaukee, I was still actually able to find the Big Dipper every now and then. So when you find the Big Dipper, you can see that all of the stars here are labeled, which is really nice. You can kind of pick out all of these named stars. Mizar is a fun one, the star that we have highlighted here. Mizar is actually kind of a visual double, and so it's Mizar and Alcor, which is kind of right next to it, and it was actually used by the Romans as an eye test for their archers. So to be an archer in the Roman military, you had to be able to distinguish Mizar and Alcor with the naked eye. And just so for any reference, if you wear glasses, or if your vision is even close to 20/20, you can distinguish those two pretty easily. So the bar was not too high for the Roman archers, but they had to set the bar somewhere. Now the main reason we care about the Big Dipper is for these 2 stars down here, Merak and Dubhe. And I'll explain what these other lines coming off of the Big Dipper are in just a second. The reason you want these 2 stars, and wrong way, is because if you kind of imagine drawing a line and connecting those two from Merak to Dubhe, and you extend that out, you'll eventually hit a star that's kind of all by itself named Polaris. Now, if you're not familiar with the star Polaris, you probably know it better as the North Star. And Polaris is very important because it stays basically in that position for the entire night and for the entire year. So you can always go out and find Polaris in the same spot every single night. Now, if another thing you might have noticed is that Polaris is actually also part of a constellation. Oh, wrong thing. Ursa Minor, or the Little Dipper. And now I do have to actually correct myself. I kind of refer to as the Big Dipper as a constellation, but the Big Dipper is actually not a constellation all of its own. As you can see, it's actually Ursa Major, or the Big Bear. So we have Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. So it makes sense that the Big Bear and the Little Bear are kind of right next to each other, and you can use the Big Bear to find the little one. Now, one thing that's kind of a fun story is you notice that these 2 bears have very long tails. And these long tails exist for a reason, and it actually happens to go back to Zeus, who grabbed these 2 bears by the tail, swung them around, and he swung them so fast that when he was swinging them, their tails stretched out, and when he let go, they went flying and got stuck all the way in space, and they have stayed in that spot ever since. Now, bringing up Zeus actually ties in a little bit to what we want to talk about, because all of the zodiac constellations that we look at, we tend to refer to the Greek lines and the Greek stories that go along with them, just like we do with Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. So many of the stories of the constellations in our sky have to do with Greek mythology. So the first thing to talk about is kind of the different coordinate systems in the night sky. So we are going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the different coordinate systems. So just remember that the tip of the tail of the little bear is Polaris, or the North Star. And I want to first talk about the grid that you will almost always kind of refer to, you hear astronomers refer to when they talk about RA and DEC. Katya, would you like to tell us a little bit about RA and DEC and the equatorial grid that I currently have up?
Yes. All right. So, yeah, as Adam said, 2 coordinates that are very, very commonly used in all astronomy is RA and DEC, or right ascension and declination. They're just abbreviations for that. So basically, the grid, you can imagine if you have an umbrella, for example, and if you're not afraid to open it inside your house, not superstitious, go ahead and take that umbrella and open it. So if you take the very tip of the umbrella, virtual background is very difficult, but Anyway, if you take the tip of the umbrella and you point it directly at where the North Star is out in the sky, um, and you rotate the umbrella, that is how the sky looks like it's moving throughout the night. And so the different spokes of the umbrella are your lines of right ascension and declination. Um, so if you all know the terms latitude and longitude, that's the coordinate system that we use on Earth. Take that coordinate system and kind of pop it up and project it onto the night sky. And there you have your lines of right and declination, wherein lines of declination are like your lines of latitude in the sky. So kind of horizontal looking. And then your lines of longitude, so more up down, are your lines of right ascension. So when you're moving your telescope in declination, quote unquote, you're moving it kind of up and down in the sky, while moving it in longitude looks like you're moving it kind of from left to right. At least this is all the position at Yerkes that we have, or up like in the North American Chicagoland area at this latitude. And so the center of the grid is always pointed at the North Star. So you can see now with our location, it's kind of, somewhere up in the sky. But if we go to different locations around the Earth, this reference point changes. So Adam, if we go somewhere, let's say nice and warm, like on the equator, for example, we can see how this grid changes.
Yeah, so one of the cool things about uh, being in Stellarium is that you can very easily change where you are on the world just by clicking on a map. So now you can see Ursa Minor is down here towards the horizon.
So
And
at
as
the
we...
equator, oh,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. As you get the equator, you have, as Adam pointed out, Polaris is almost directly at the horizon, so all of the stars in the sky look like they're basically rotating around, so making little semicircles in the sky. Um, on the opposite side, if we go somewhere really cold and up north, so near the North Pole, let's say we're going to like Svalbard or something. That's the closest north location I can think of.
I just clicked on the map and I got close.
Oh, you can do that. I didn't even know you could click on the map. Um, yeah. So right now, actually, if you go far enough north, the sun will never set. It's at that time where you have like white nights, as they're called, in some places where the sun just never sets and it's continually day. And you can see that now our North Star is pointed almost directly up at the zenith of the sky. And so it's as if your umbrella was, instead of pointing was pointed straight upwards.
And this might be a good point to bring up the other very commonly used uh, coordinate system, because if you bring them both up when you're kind of up towards the North Pole, they almost line up. And if I was exactly at the North Pole, they would line up. Why? Can you explain what are these two lines and why they line up, Katya?
Okay, so the other grid that Adam has brought up right now is commonly called the altitude azimuth grid, or coordinate system that we have. And so in this case, the grid itself is based on the position of an observer on Earth. So it depends upon the position of stars relative to the horizon. So in this case, altitude is how far off the horizon you are. So altitude is like your latitude. And then longitude is like your azimuth. So are you going like around, starting from north as being your 0 point, kind of your 0 degrees. And so this is like if you've ever seen a Dobsonian, for example, that we used out on a lawn during star parties. those were on an LTAS system where you could point the telescope directly at the horizon and then move it up, down, or left or right. The problem with LTAS is that the coordinates depend upon the location of the observer. So the coordinates change based on where you are on Earth. So we like to use the equatorial system of Arian deck, which doesn't depend upon that.
Right, now I'm going to take us back and you guys can see how these two coordinate systems look from here in Williams Bay. And I did notice we've got somebody from New Mexico, so your sky will look a little different, but I'm pretty sure he already knows that. And so here we are back at Yerkes, and you can see now Polaris is back kind of where it belongs in our sky, and azimuth or the zenith is now still straight above us and not quite near the same position as Polaris. But with that, I want to then talk about one other line that's up in the night sky that is relative to the topic of conversation for today, and it's called the ecliptic. Now, one thing that a lot of us might not think about is the sun actually travels along a path in our sky. I'm going to actually put the atmosphere back on. So if we go back to when the sun is up, you can see that the sun travels through our sky because the Earth is spinning, and it travels along a line called the ecliptic. So if I turn the ecliptic on and I play time forward back into the night, you can see that the sun stays along the ecliptic. And now that it's night, we can actually trace out the line of the ecliptic over the course of an entire night. And when you look at this line, it actually stays and passes through the same 12 constellations, or it used to be 12, now 13, but we'll get into that in just a second. Now, it travels actually through 12 constellations, and these have become to be known as the Zodiac. So the Zodiac is basically just the constellations that the sun travels through over the course of a year as we orbit around it, and our position relative to the sun changes, making it appear like the sun is moving through different constellations. So now I'm just going to pick a random spot on the ecliptic, and we're going to go through all of the zodiacs. And by doing so, we'll start out with a good one. So Virgo has to go back to the Greek myth of Persephone and Demeter. So Demeter, as any of you who are not familiar with Greek mythology, was the sister of Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and kind of the main original 6 Olympian gods, and her daughter was Persephone. Now, the story goes that Persephone was tricked into a marriage with Hades by eating a piece of fruit in the underworld, and because she ate from that fruit, she was then trapped and not allowed to leave. Now, the gods were not happy about this, and when Demeter found out that her daughter was not allowed to leave the underworld, she became very, very sad, and all of the crops on Earth died, as she was the kind of the goddess of farming and crops. And so that did not work out well for humans, and so the gods decided that Persephone would only spend a couple of months in Hades a year. And so when Persephone is spent with Hades, and so when Persephone is in the underworld, that is when our winter occurs, and Persephone, or Virgo, happens to come up above the horizon at the beginning of the night, at the beginning of spring. Oh, and I'm sorry, Karte, that was her line.
Oh, that's...
So Virgo is one of kind of a very notable constellation in the zodiac, and we can just keep moving along the ecliptic, picking different stars. Here we have Libra, which is kind of the scales of justice, and it's actually very close to during the fall equinox. The sun is actually in Libra, which is also one of the few times, as in twice a year, when we have equal times of night and day, and that was kind of seen as a balance and kind of a justice between night and day. So that was how Libra kind of got its origin. So now we got to pass through the night a little bit. And we'll pick out the next constellation in the zodiac here, and it is Scorpius. So Scorpius actually kind of comes from a bit of a long story relating to a fight with with Orion, who is actually never in our sky at the same time as Scorpius, and that was in part because of their big fight and the gods putting both of them in the sky, but at different times of the year, so they are constantly chasing one another over the course of a year. Now, Katya, do you have anything interesting to add about Scorpius?
Oh yeah, so if you look at Scorpius, it's usually, at least in Wisconsin during the summers, it's usually down kind of close to the horizon. And there's a very visible and distinct red star that you can see in Scorpius. And that red star is called Antares. And it's a huge red supergiant. And the name of it, actually, Antares, comes from anti-Aries, or like at war with Aries. So Aries is the Greek version of the Roman god Mars. And so it's a way to distinguish Mars from Antares, since they're both bright and red in the sky.
Yes, all right, so we'll continue through the zodiac, and we have about 10 minutes until, or about 6 or 7 minutes until Richard will be joining us to talk about the Yerkes history. And so we're going to speed up a little bit. Here we have Sagittarius, who is the centaur, and his story ties back to Chiron, who was actually a very well-respected figure in Greek mythology, famous for not only training Hercules at one point, but also Jason from as Jason and the Argonauts. But personally, Sagittarius is one of my favorite constellations for a completely different reason, because there's actually something hiding in Hercules. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, Katya?
Yeah, so with Sagittarius, you might notice kind of the shape that makes up its upper body part. So the head and the arms and stuff kind of looks like a little teapot. And this is actually an asterism that we can see. So it's right by Scorpius. If you look at it in the summer, you'll see a very visible looking teapot. And actually, you can see also rising up above it is the band of the Milky Way. And so it's said that the Milky Way is steam rising from the top of the teapot, which is part of the actual constellation of Sagittarius.
And so if I take the constellations down, the lines down, and the drawings, you can see the teapot sitting there with the steam rising. And once you go out and you find the teapot yourself, you will never see Sagittarius again. You will only see the teapot, as I'm sure Katya can attest to as well.
I always see the teapot. I've never seen actual Sagittarius when I look at it.
Same. Now, one thing you might notice is there's actually a gap here between Scorpius and Sagittarius. There's a kind of a little area where the sun actually passes through a 13th constellation named Ophiuchus. And so Ophiuchus is typically ignored, but he is the serpent bearer, and unfortunately does not have the most interesting of stories, and actually has quite a few stories relating to his origin, as we're not entirely sure where his story comes from. Moving over here, we have another one, Capricornus, who was actually responsible for nursing Zeus when his mother actually hid him so that his dad wouldn't eat him, to prevent him from taking power from him. And so we're gonna keep going a little bit farther with the zodiac. Now, at this point, the sun is coming up, so we're just going to turn the atmosphere off so the sunlight doesn't bother us, and it'll actually end up being quite useful, as you'll see in a moment. Here we have Aquarius, the water bearer, and Aquarius is actually based off of Ganymede, which is also one of the names around of the largest moon around Jupiter, and comes from the water bearer who was kidnapped by Zeus in order to be the prized water bearer because he was said to be very, very attractive, and Zeus liked attractive people, and so he thought kidnapping Ganymede and making him serve water was doing him a favor for some reason. So that is why
Fun
we
fact,
have...
Ganymede. Oh.
Go ahead.
Fun fact, Ganymede is actually the largest moon in our solar system. It's larger than even Pluto.
It's a big moon. And here we have another kind of one of the funnier constellations in the zodiac. It's two fish tied together. This one actually has kind of an interesting story, and it goes back to when Mother Earth was angry, or Mother Earth or Gaia was angry with the Greek gods. She created this terrifying demon in order to attack them, and instead of immediately fighting, they all decided to turn into different animals in order to hide. And Aphrodite and her son, who we sometimes actually refer to as Cupid from the Roman mythology, quickly turned into two fish tied together so that they would not lose each other and hid in the ocean. And it actually ended up working, and Aphrodite was so grateful to the fish for lending their form that she put their images up into the night sky, and that is where we get the constellation Pisces. And as we keep moving through here, we can now see where the sun is. And the next constellation is a smaller one of the zodiac named Aries. Aries was a ram and was actually famous for the fleece that the Jason and the Argonauts worked so tirelessly to get and bring home. Next after Aries, we have Taurus. And Taurus is actually representative of, well, pretty obviously, the bull. And there are a couple different stories relating to Taurus's origin. But I actually want to mention, did you, sorry. So if we notice one thing right now about Taurus, you can see that the sun is actually how you could say is in the constellation of Taurus. And so when we think about zodiac signs and how we each get our zodiac, it actually has to go back to where the sun was when you were born. Or I should say, where the sun was on the date you were born, but 2,000 years ago. Because, Katya, why has it shifted a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's the concept called procession, that is more easily illustrated if you look at a spinning top, or, for example, this pencil I have. So the Earth has an axis of rotation. This is its axis of rotation, this pencil. And so the Earth is spinning, as it is. But actually, the axis itself is also rotating. So it's making these small circles in the sky like this. And it's pretty slow. It's very hard to notice, day by day. But after centuries, the change becomes noticeable. And so usually the constellation, like the sign that you have, quote unquote, of your birthday is not actually where the sun is at the time.
Yeah, so they actually did recently decide that they wanted to take the 12 I shouldn't say recently. Eventually, they decided that the 12 constellations should just represent 12 portions of the year, and so they actually then ended up assigning them dates not relative to where the sun was, but just breaking it out evenly, because the sun actually only passes through Scorpius for 6 days. So really, to be a Scorpius, pretty hard. You got to hit a small window. Now we only have
6 out of 365.
Yes, it's a small target. So now we have another one, the Gemini Twins. But fun fact, they were actually not twins, but half brothers. One of them, Pollux, having the father of Zeus, and the other one having the king of Troy, because Zeus, of course, liked to interfere with mortals' lives and enjoyed having many children. And so we have Castor and Pollux as part of the Gemini Twins. After them is Cancer the Crab, which I think I will go with as my favorite zodiac constellation, in part because Cancer is in the sky because when Hercules was fighting Hydra, the many-headed dragon, he was actually pinched on the foot by this crab, and Hera, who thought it was so funny and not a big fan of Hercules, decided to immortalize that crab by putting it up into the sky forever. And that's part of why we have a crab in our sky, is simply because he pinched the foot of Hercules. And last but not least, we have the zodiac constellation of Leo the Lion, who also comes from one of the tasks of Hercules, and it was actually the first task was defeating this lion and bringing back its mane. And that actually completes all 13 of the zodiac. And so we want to talk quickly about how the zodiac connects to Yerkes as we bring our guest on in just a moment.
I'm here.
All right, welcome, Richard. All right, here we go. So now I have the camera going, so I will no longer be in this view. And what we're going to do is actually take a little bit closer of a look at some of the Yerkes architecture, thanks to some of the molds that were made for us by Acme Design. So, what do you think? Should we start with the pillar?
Yeah, let's do it. And also, let's introduce Richard.
Yes, sorry. Katya, would you like to introduce?
Yeah. So, Richard, hello, welcome. And so, Richard worked at Yerkes for something like 40 years. A lot of those years was spent as an amazing tour guide, giving tours of the building during the daytime. And he's also, you could say, Yerkes' go-to historian, knowing a lot about Yerkes architecture and his history and legends.
Okay, well, I'm ready whenever you are.
All right, so let's go ahead and start. We'll work our way down, and nicely enough, we'll be starting with the one we left off with in Stellarium. Here, looking at Leo the Lion. And one of the cool things about having this molding is kind of the three-dimensionality of the pillar itself. And they did a fantastic job getting these designs. So actually, we've already come to the first thing that was actually not part of the zodiac. Richard, who is this?
I'm not seeing anything except.
Oh, are we? Am I not? I need to share the screen quick. So once I share the screen, you will be able to follow along with where we're looking.
The famous man with his nose in profile. Keep in mind, these are one-to-one. It's a one-to-one cast of the original. He is above a sleigh bell or a jingle bell, but the guy that's important is the man with a long nose. And what's important about that is, originally, there was a wasp as part of the design from 1897 on the nose, stinging it, making it swell. Apparently, this means someone's being stung for money. And we are pretty sure it's the fellow who, what's his name? John D. Rockefeller, who paid for the University of Chicago. And that more or less makes sense. He paid for the University of Chicago, so he's being jokingly stung for the money to pay for the original University of Chicago. We don't know for a fact, but it seems likely. Just before he came to Yerkes Observatory, John D. Rockefeller, on a visit, the then director, George Ellery Hale, chiseled off all the wasps or bees on the noses. So they're gone now. Katya has a picture of, I don't know, I don't have it with me. She has it showing John D. Rockefeller in profile and showing the picture, a picture we have, the only picture we have with the wasp still on the nose.
Ah, yes. I can show that at the end here.
Yes.
Okay.
And Katya, if you want to, you can use those images as your backgrounds. You want me
Oh,
to save those images,
okay.
put them up as your
I
backgrounds, and we can
can...
show them that way.
Yeah, I can do that.
And I'm going to
Let
ask
me
Adam
do that.
to go down from the jingle bell to show the man with the smiling face.
Who is this?
Well, for a while, we thought it was William Rainey Harper. The story went, the first president of the University of Chicago is shown here. He was rather rotund, in a good mood. And there's another image we'll look at in a few minutes, which is supposedly William Rainey Harper in a bad mood. Now, I can't see myself. Can you see the picture here?
Yes.
That is a picture of William Rainey Harper, and it looks reasonably close. But this looks much closer in terms of the nose and the mouth, even the eyes. And that's a picture of the architect Henry Ives Cobb, who was a Freemason and very, very secretive. It said all his papers were destroyed as soon as he died, for whatever reasons. He was also a Freemason, and there are a lot of Freemason symbols in the art and architecture of Yerkes Observatory. I'm not a Freemason, so I can't be sure, but it seems to me that's a logical thing. Below him is a spade, which is just a filler as far as I can tell. And to the right, to your right of the spade, is a man in the moon with an impossibly placed star, because you can't really have a star in between the horns of the moon. And we have no idea who it might be. It could be anybody, or it could be nobody. Then there's a shield to his right. Again, it's just a filler. But go up from the shield, you'll find a 5-pointed star.
Right up here?
Yes. Directly above it is a turtle coming out at you. Why do we have a turtle? Well, because you see the Earth is on the back of a giant turtle. Well, we don't know. It could be that. It might just be a turtle. You want to go up?
All right, so we'll go up a little bit here.
And that's the scales.
And there we have the scales of Libra.
We do have Libra the scales. And to the right, or rather directly above Libra the scales, is a strange little device made of 4 triangles, which is probably a Freemason thing. To its right is Cancer the crab.
So if we go a little right,
How many legs is Cancer the crab supposed to have? Insects have 6. I think he has 8.
oh yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's biologically correct or not. And to the left of him, and upper left, is Aries the ram. Now, 2,000 years ago, when the sun was rising in springtime, it was rising in the constellation Aries the ram. in the spring. So astrologically speaking, I'm supposed to be an Aries, but they're all one off backward now. So I'm really a Pisces. And directly above that, there's a strange little triangle, pair of triangles, one atop the other. And we really don't have a clue. It could mean nothing at all. It's not a Jewish star. They don't float above one another like that. And to the right of that is the angry face, which I always thought was William Rainey Harper when he was in a bad mood. He is known for having had a temper. Can you see that image?
Oh, yes.
So for years, I said it was William Rainey Harper in a good mood and in a bad mood. Let's go to the right and then start working down. Remember, this column is 1/3 of the actual columns at Yerkes. Each image is repeated pretty much 24 times. I have no idea what the thing directly above the porpoise is. Nobody seems to know. Maybe you have some ideas. And below the porpoise is a serpent. To the right of the serpent, Virgo the Virgin. Definitely a sign of the zodiac. Below Virgo and to the left, below the serpent, are a pair of owls, probably symbolizing wisdom. They're also creatures that are considered astronomical. And directly to their right is probably, that's Pisces the fish directly below them. And above and to the right of Pisces the fish is probably one of about 5 different versions of Charles Tyson Yerkes, the Chicago multimillionaire who paid for the University of Chicago, donating money to the University of Chicago.
Right. And up above, we have
Taurus the bull.
So now, did we already get down here?
No, that's Capricorn the goat.
Yes.
Some people think it looks like a bunny rabbit, but no, it's a goat.
Oh, I can actually see why you could see it as a rabbit, but
And directly to the left of him, I think that might be, that's Scorpio the Scorpion.
oh, did you say right? I think I went left.
No, you did fine. I meant left. What you're looking at now looks like an open parenthesis, a straight bar, and a closed parenthesis. But I think that might be Henry Ives Cobb's initials. And directly to the left of that is definitely the Aquarius the water bearer, an old man carrying a jug. Now, when you go visit Yerkes, it's not necessarily possible to see all of these equally well because the columns are rotated slightly with respect to one another. I think we may have actually gotten everything. There is a 6-pointed star.
Yes, there is one, yeah.
Right there, which means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and it is a Freemason symbol. The Freemasons are very, very mysterious and secretive. Did we get Pisces the fish to the left of that, of the Star of David?
I believe we did.
Fairly Star of David.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a Star of David because it has so many possible meanings.
So I have a question
Yeah,
for you, Richard.
that star.
Oh, go ahead, Katya.
I was gonna say that star and other imagery like that is also you can see it in some of the moldings on the inside of the observatory.
Yep.
A lot of times there's actually a lot of like quote unquote star imagery, and another interpretation is that all of that just has to do with the fact that Hale loved studying the sun. He loved doing spectroscopy with it and studying solar astronomy, and so that was a tribute to him and his love for that. From the star, the six-pointed star that you see, to the stained glass. If you go into the rotunda of the observatory and look straight up, there's a beautiful stained glass star up on the ceiling.
Yep. And we also have on either side, north and south, an image of Helios, the sun god, rather large. All of the outside work done in terracotta, a mixture of baked sand and clay, which was extremely popular in the 1880s and 1890s.
And this pillar was cast, so when Acme was here, they put, I don't know what material they used, but it was this like white goo, kind of sticky, kind of like Play-Doh, but a different consistency than that.
Yeah,
and it would literally be stuck into all the different parts of the pillar, and then let set and then taken off.
Now, I have a quick question for you. Is this a snowflake because it's in Wisconsin?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a modified cross. There's a circle and then the cross on the other side, or it's on top of it. Could be anything, could be nothing, could be so many of those smaller things are filler. And if you slowly move around, you'll note that there is an incredibly complicated symmetry. Stop right now. To the left and right of Taurus the bull are what I refer to as bullets. They're places where the braiding rotates around. So it really is hideously complicated. If you try to draw it, it's difficult to do. And the best unwrapping of the pillar I've done so far was by photographing the cast of the pillar that you are looking at now, because you just can't go to the real one and fit a camera in the small spaces between a couple of the pillars. The pillars are actually facing each other in a strange kind of way. That's a three-leafed clover directly above Taurus the bull for no apparent reason. And there's a strange cross
Go ahead, Richard.
to the left of it.
Right. So one of the things we've been mentioning is a lot of the architecture and the symbolism on the inside, and we actually also happen to have a couple casts of some of those pieces with us as well. So now we're gonna move over, talk a little bit about those. So Richard, would you like to tell us a little bit about where is this piece from?
Well, they are very common on the inside. You see that same frieze. Are there 6 different things, some of which are repeated? For example, there is what looks like a backward swastika surrounding a square, but it's really not a swastika at all. It is a broken cross. To the right of it is a 6-sided star with a 6-sided diamond in the middle, surrounded by 6 spheres. It's probably Masonic. It's certainly not a Jewish star, although one of the more common questions happens to have been, why do we have a Nazi swastika next to a Jewish star? Well, they're ancient symbols. The 3-lobed thing to the right of the 6-sided star is a jingle bell. And then you have, not for the first time, those 2 curves with spheres and a leaf or something coming above. I've never quite figured that one out. Then it repeats with the 6-sided star and the pyramid in the middle. And back to the jingle bell. And then there's a flower with many petals. Now, when you go to Yerkes and you look at this, there are owls on either side of it, I believe. Don't you have the owl with outstretched wings?
We do. Again. So I will bring that back around. closer look at the owl.
I lied. There aren't two of those. There's one of those for each collection of 6 of those elements.
So,
And you'll notice
oh, go ahead.
his are unfurled and he's standing on a sphere of some sort or a leaf shape.
So you
There's
mentioned before that owls are often associated with astronomy. Is it? Do we know why?
Well, I think it's partially because they're nighttime creatures. And the phrase wise as an owl is a very old one. So I really don't know anything, if there's any more about mythology having to do with owls and astronomy.
Gotcha.
And a lot of the things, the you know, what we say about the architecture, a lot of that is actually inferred by all the historians like Richard and his colleagues throughout the years, because the architect of the observatory, Henry Ives Cobb, actually ordered all of his documents and papers to be destroyed upon his death. And so we don't have any of those, you know, original documents. We don't have like a biography of Cobb to say this. And so there's sometimes various interpretations of things that we see on the pillar that historians can disagree upon or argue about.
That's right, Katya. If you look at the bottom, you'll see that there are parts of 3 different kinds of shapes of leaves. Those are Acanthus leaves, which are very popular in Greco-Romanesque architectural detail. And you'll notice there are 3 of those. If you go to the very top, you'll notice those are the 3 tops of Acanthus leaves. At the very top of that, you'll see 3 bottoms. They're designed to fit atop one another. So the same thing on each column 3 times. Then you go to the very top.
Let me point those out quick.
Okay.
So the leaves you're referring to?
Oh.
The one down here?
Okay. Yeah, like that. If you go to the very top of that, there are the leaves again.
Gotcha. So was each section of the pillar made separately?
Yes, they were cast separately. And in fact, they used 2 different molds. So there are minor differences, but notable. You can tell which mold it was made from. And I will point that out several times in the book I'm working on, if I ever finish it.
I can't wait to read it.
I can't wait to write it. My wife's chuckling too. Do you see the above the 3 leaves of the column? There is a little funny propeller-shaped thing.
Have to guide me a little bit, Richard.
Yeah, it's below those 2 curves. There it is. I always call it a propeller. It almost looks like a galaxy, but I don't think the shapes of galaxies would have made their way into the architectural detail back in 1897.
Ah, yes.
Back then they would have been galaxies.
Know about galaxies. Yeah.
And if you go to visit the observatory where Pluto was discovered, you should know that.
Lol?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been there.
There are images of Saturn. We have no images of planets, to the best of my knowledge.
That's actually very interesting. I did not know that, because planets tend to be in just about everything else when it comes to astronomy.
Yeah, one would think.
Huh. Alright, so we are coming up on 9. Is there anything else you would like to wrap up with and tell us a little bit about the history of Yerkes. Kat, I believe did you have a question left?
Did anyone have any questions?
Oh yes. Let's see if there.
Yeah, if anyone in the chat wants to ask a question, feel free.
Oh, I see Jeff is in there. Oh, it's like a hurricane symbol from a storm app. It kind of does. The little leaf on the bottom.
It does look like a hurricane.
But a hurricane in southern Wisconsin would be quite out of place.
Very. Tornadoes, not so much.
No storm.
Oh, we do have requests to know when your book is coming out, Richard. I think we all want to be put on that waiting list.
My wife is laughing.
Yes.
And laughing. Now that Yerkes is more or less open again, one of the first things I want to do is finish the book and see if I can get it sold. And if and when, then it should be available online.
Well, we are definitely going to be looking forward to that.
What did you say?
I will definitely
have to get it
edited?
self-published.
There's a good possibility I'll get it self-published. If I can't find someone to publish it for me, there's a possibility the University of Wisconsin publishing company might be interested in it. They have a history of doing important buildings and writing about them.
So, Richard, is your book going to focus mostly on the architecture, the history, both?
Oh, it's mostly architectural detail. It has a little bit about the history.
Okay.
So there'll be a bare bones basic history kind of thing people might have heard during one of my tours.
So, well, we are going to be looking forward to when your book comes out, and we really want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure having you on and being able to go through the architecture of Yerkes remotely and this in depth. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Stay healthy. Good night.
Have a good night, Richard.
Thank you. Good night.
All right, and let me change the view quick. Oh, there I am. Okay. So for everybody else.
Oh, 1 second. Richard, yeah, there's a question. Is there a title for your book?
Yes, there was a title. Maida, do you remember the title?
The keys to Yerkes architecture.
No, you know what? Maida and I were discussing a possible title. I wanted to call it, no, I don't remember what the working title is.
No, it's the key, it really was. The keys to Yerkes architecture.
The keys to Yerkes architecture.
So a little pun there.
Yes.
You know how many times I've heard the pun, your keys? What about my keys?
Yeah. These are am I still up?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
You are.
These are definitely my keys. Thing, my old Yerkes keys.
One last thing, Richard. Unfortunately, I did have a technical problem earlier where you were frozen. Could you show us the picture again where you decided that it was Ives Cobb?
I decided this is Henry Ives Cobb.
Yes.
Gotcha.
The other
And so that's an example of one of the things that some historians disagree on, or I guess debate on.
You could say there's a little bit of
Lively discussion.
Lively discussion is good. I am guessing this is proof that it's not William Rainey Harper. It vaguely looks like William Rainey Harper until you take William Rainey Harper and put his picture on top of it. So in the book, I actually show both.
Mm-hmm.
So this was pure inspiration. I found a picture of Henry Ives Cobb, and there aren't a whole lot of them, and I said, that looks like the guy on the column.
We have a question. Do you and Meta agree on this?
Do Maida and
Yes.
I agree on whether that's Wayne Rainey Harper?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Oh,
yes. One of the few things we agree on having to do with Yerkes architectural detail. So that's not true. She agrees on most of what I say about it.
All right, so we'll have to let the other Yerkes history buffs chime in the comments
Mhm.
later, and we'll get that discussion going about who that is.
One more thing about that. Richard Hudis, the other Yerkes tour guide, learned everything he knows from me. Or Dan Kaler. And Dan Kaler absolutely pretty much knows all about the architectural detail and disagrees with what I think on some things. But I mean, he listened to my tours again and again and again. So if there's stuff wrong, it's because I was wrong.
Well, we're just gonna assume you were right for tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are definitely
It's
the authority
an
right now.
interpretation.
Exactly.
History is always up for different interpretations. We may never know which is right or wrong.
Yeah, we'll never. I'm hopeful one day we'll find Henry Ives Cobb's. Papers, but I
Yeah.
doubt we will. He instructed his son to burn them when he died, and apparently his son did that. Dan Kaler has been looking for them at the University of Chicago. So there's still much more to discover, but I think I'm at a good stopping point.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are really excited for your book.
Thank you.
Yes.
And again, thank you so much for joining us. It was really a pleasure to have somebody with your breadth of knowledge talk to us about all of the intricacies of this architecture.
You know it like the back of your own hand.
What
Thank
made
you
it?
for the compliments.
Oh, thank you. Well, I showed in the back of my hand, so I didn't think I needed to say thank you for the compliment.
You're very welcome. And so we are just about to wrap up then for the rest of the day. For this night, unfortunately, if you were hoping to see the live observing session later tonight, is going to be canceled because unfortunately the weather is just not going to cooperate with us in Sonoma. So the Stonehenge Observatory will be sitting all alone, unused tonight.
That is, if you haven't looked at some of the other observing sessions that we've done in the past, go check them out on YouTube. We have all of them there.
Yes, and thank you all for joining us. If you enjoyed the video and you're enjoying the series, please show your support by going to our website and donating, or just sharing our message around. Thank you guys all for tuning in, and have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Yep. Good night, everyone.